Hey everybody, this is Josh Nelson. I'm just waiting on the line here. I'll be starting the presentation here shortly at 11 a.m. But I wanted to let you know that we're going to be dealing with a couple things here. We're going to be actually using the chat feature and the questions feature, and I'd like to test those out before we get started. If anybody can jump on and tell me if you are seeing anything for a chat or a questions box, please feel free to use those, and we'll use that to answer any questions that you've got along the way. Or if you're having any technical difficulties, certainly we'll be able to help you out throughout the presentation. So if somebody could help me out by typing something, any kind of a test message, just hi Josh or something like that in the chat feature, that would be great. All right. Hi, George. I see some people are signing in and making comments. That's great. Thank you. All right. Hi, Larry. See your comments there. So that's great. Feel free to use these boxes during the presentation. I'll keep an eye on those to make sure that I'm answering any questions. And of course, certainly we'll open it up at the end for any questions that you might have. We'll give people one more minute here and we'll get started. All right, see quite a few people signing in. So glad that you're able to attend today. Typically, we try to do these around the noon hour because it seems to work best with people's schedule. But we are recording this, so we are going to have a recorded version of this if anybody would like to pass this on to a friend or family member, or if you just like to re-watch it later on because it was that good, then we're going to provide that resource to you. We're also going to post it to our YouTube channel, so you'll have access to it out there as well. All right, it's 11 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my webcam. Hi, everybody. It is June 7th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And not only do we get to talk to people all across the country, but we get to talk to people locally. And what we found is that webinars are working really well for people, for our clients, as opposed to having to make it to a physical location. The traffic gets crazy, people's schedules are crazy, so it's just a lot more convenient to be able to dial in from your desk, your office, your home. And the other part of it is that about 15% of our clients don't even live here anymore. Oftentimes they started here in Colorado, but maybe they moved someplace else, or they might even be on vacation and they want to be able to dial in or be able to watch the replay when they're on vacation. So thanks for all of you who are on here live. It's always more fun to have people on here live, but we actually get more people after the fact that watch the recorded version. So it's good to have both. Today we're going to talk about 3 methods to not running out of money, and I can tell you that that is the number one fear of retirees. They've done studies on that, and I can tell you just from real conversations with clients that that's the number one fear that people have, is that they're going to run out of money sometime before they pass away. So number 2, by the way, is death. Number 2 is dying, and number 1 is running out of money. So we obviously want to take this topic very seriously. And my goal as a financial advisor is to make sure that all my clients are confident in their plan and that they know that, hey, nothing in life is guaranteed, but we've got a solid plan that has a really, really high likelihood of working out. And the nice thing about financial planning is it's financial planning. It's not just a financial plan where we do one thing and that plan is set in stone for the rest of our lives. We get to keep making different decisions along the way. So excited to give the presentation today because the topic is so important and because it's one that produces a lot of anxiety in people's lives. Much better off to be proactive. Nobody really plans to fail, but a lot of people fail to plan. I'm sure you've heard that quote before, but that's the reality, is that the vast majority of Americans have no financial plan. They've got no financial strategy. They might be good savers and they might end up being successful by accident, but being successful by accident, I guess it's better than failing, right? But to me, that's kind of scary, is just leaving it to fate or luck, that we're going to end up having a plan that's going to work out. We'd much rather plan, be proactive. So we're going to talk about the 3 methods to not running out of money today, what we can do about it, in other words, to plan ahead. And I want to have questions too along the way. I'm going to be keeping an eye on my chat feature, my questions feature. So this will be much more fun if we have some interactivity. And if there are some points that I'm blasting past or that you want me to hit on, certainly feel free to ask along the way, or we'll hit those after the fact. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam for right now, and everybody can see my slides. So this is about really enjoying your retirement more. And when people are worrying, when they've got a lot of anxiety, it's not enjoyable. They're really not able to fully enjoy their life, enjoy their retirement. And so we want to make sure that people have the tools to be able to go forward. So agenda for today, number 1, fear in retirement, what you can do about it. Learn the 3 methods to not run out of money in retirement. Very important. We want this to be actionable. Tony Robbins, and many of you know I'm a Tony Robbins fan. One of my favorite quotes is to remember that rewards come in action, not in discussion. So it's good to talk about stuff, but if we don't take action, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. So we're definitely going to give you some actionable stuff that you can walk away with today. Number 3, find out the easy tweaks that you can make to your own financial strategy. And number 4, prepare to enjoy your retirement. And some people might say, well, duh, that's what retirement's about. But what I can tell you is that there are a lot of people out there that have been very financially successful. And so they've achieved a lot, but they're just not fulfilled. They're just not happy. So there are 2 sides to that coin. Retirement's not just about the money. It's not just about having enough to retire. It's about what your life is going to look like and being in a position that you can really completely feel fulfilled in your life through your relationships with your family and the stuff that you get to do. Having that freedom is great from a financial standpoint. But if you don't feel fulfilled, I can tell you from working with a lot of clients over the years that they're not happy, and oftentimes they end up back at work. Not to say that going back to work is always a bad thing necessarily. A lot of cases, people enjoy their work and they want to go back. They want the challenge. But in some circumstances, people go back to work because they're just not happy. They can't figure out kind of what to do with their life after that career ends. So that's an important part about what we'll be talking about in some future series, living in retirement and the art of retirement. Those are presentations that are going to come later on this summer. And it's going to be a lot more about, so what is life like in retirement beyond the money? What is life like? And how can you really have a retirement that counts and that you can look back on someday when you're really, really old, and looking back, you can look back and know that you made the most of it and you really created some magic moments. So number 1 fear most people have when it comes to retirement, again, we talked about running out of money. And I can tell you that that's a real fear because it happens. They say, the experts say that 30% of retirees have nothing. Literally, they have just Social Security coming in every month. So they have no other source of income or assets. And what I can tell you is that Social Security will keep you from starving to death. And that's exactly why it was designed back in the 30s, because there really were people that were starving to death in their old age. And the program started. We could debate about whether it's good, bad, indifferent. But in our planning methods, we don't get into politics. Really, we're just talking about what is. And I can tell you that's why the program was designed. That's about all that you're going to be able to do is survive on Social Security. Probably not a lot of traveling or helping kids, grandkids, helping other people that you want to help with your money. Probably not a lot of that's going to happen. It's pretty significant because when you think about longevity, it's going up dramatically. And of course, all the medical technology and advancements that are coming, this is getting scarier and scarier, because back when Social Security was designed in the 30s, people didn't live very long. The average life expectancy was in the 60s. So retirement really wasn't a thing. It really wasn't something that needed to be planned for a whole lot. And in most of the circumstances, when people did live to an old age, they lived with their kids. So it really wasn't a big deal to be planning or having a lot of money for retirement. So a very different story now for a married 65 couple. they say that there's actually a 1 in 4 chance that one of them will make it to 95. That's some pretty good odds, and that number is going up dramatically over time. Those statistics keep getting adjusted, and again, that's not even counting for the things that we think are coming down the pike here, as far as being able to regenerate our own organs and things like that. You think about the things that people die of, much of it is going to be preventable. So what can you do about it? One of those things would be get another job or work longer. In some circumstances, we see people retire too early. We see them retire earlier than they have the means to do because they either hate their job so badly or they had some kind of a health event or some kind of a layoff. Maybe it wasn't by choice. But in a lot of circumstances, people financially really would be better off working longer or getting another job in retirement. In some circumstances, people might retire from their full-time job and then they will do a gig on the side of retirement, essentially either working part-time or taking on a second career. For example, here in Fort Collins, Loveland, a lot of my clients have retired and then they end up going to work at UNC or CSU, or the opportunities are always there to go back and do contract income, something else that would provide income to supplement retirement income during those early years. And for a lot of people, that's been a good fix because they may have the finances to live in retirement, but not the way they want to. They really may want to have a higher standard of living, be able to take more trips, be able to preserve more of their retirement assets for later on. And by doing some extra work or maybe just working a couple extra years, that trade-off ends up working for them. Live on Social Security, like we talked about, not the best option for most people. Again, it'll keep you from starving to death, but probably not a lot more, not a lot of experiences. And that being said, money doesn't buy happiness. We've heard that a million times, but they've actually done studies on that. There's a happiness study that's been done that has shown pretty consistently that at about the $75,000 mark here in America, once people hit the $75,000 mark for a household, the happiness level tables off. So it doesn't go down necessarily, but if you think about a $75,000 household income, at that level, most people are fairly comfortable in that they've got their housing covered, their food, they've got health insurance, they've got the basics. But beyond that, people will report pretty consistently that they're not any happier on $100,000 or $125,000 or $200,000 than they were on 75. So again, that comes back to that fulfillment side of things versus just achieving, being happy, and recognizing that money doesn't buy happiness. You can see lots of examples of celebrities and other people that have billions of dollars in some circumstances, but they're some of the most miserable people in the world, probably because they had this false impression that money would buy happiness, that some level of success or some level of money would make them happy. So rely on loved ones for support. Of course, again, that was the old school way to do things back in the 30s. You would just live with your kids or grandkids. A lot of people don't like that idea because they want to be self-sufficient and they don't want to be a burden on their loved ones. Or again, you can be proactive. That's my preference, of course, as a financial planner. I think there's a lot of things that can be done no matter how late somebody starts. I've seen people have to start or even restart having had some kind of a devastating financial event like a divorce or something like that in their 50s or even 60s. And I've seen people dig out of it. I've seen people work really, really hard and they have to play catch up, of course, but I've seen a lot of people will dig hard and reaccumulate. They'll pay down debt and they'll get enough that they're able to have a retirement that's comfortable for them. So we'll talk about the 3 methods not to run out of money. That's important for today. Method number 1 would be to develop a spending strategy. And you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a budget to me. You know, kind of it is. It's kind of important, though, because the number 1 thing that will lead to your financial success is living below your means. Back in the early 80s, you probably have heard me talk about the book, The Millionaire Next Door. And that was a study. They actually wrote a book, but that was a study by a couple of university professors that decided that they wanted to learn about millionaires and they wanted to learn about those millionaires' habits and how did they become millionaires, and really trying to match that up with some actionable ideas for people that wanted to accumulate wealth, just the common person. What they found out is that that really was the one thing, the one differentiator was that those people lived below their means. They didn't go out and buy fancy cars in some circumstances, even though they could afford the payment or qualify for the payment, or buy a house that maybe was outside of their budget that wouldn't allow them to save for their retirement. So that's number one principle in building wealth is living below your means, basically taking out, not spending everything. In other words, taking some money and setting it aside for the future. And as Americans, we're not always good at that because there's so many things we could buy, right? There's new phones and new cars and new trips and things like that that are very attractive. And the vast majority of Americans follow that, and they really don't have a lot to show for it when it comes to their retirement savings. So developing the spending strategy, one of the things that I will throw out to you here is that the 4% rule is a fairly solid rule for how much money you should be taking out or you can be taking out of your nest egg, of your retirement. And the 4% rule basically says that you can draw up to 4% of whatever your investment net worth is. So in other words, we wouldn't be including things like your home equity or your personal property, or if you had a second home or something like that, we would not be including that. We would just be including the investment assets, the IRAs, 401ks, mutual funds, things like that, that you've accumulated in liquid investment assets. So simple example, if somebody had $1 million, that means they can take out $40,000 per year out of that $1 million. And the reason why that works out is that if somebody has a reasonably balanced portfolio in retirement, in my mind, they should be able to average out over a long period of time, but they should be able to average out somewhere between 6 to 8% per year. Again, the key word there is average, because we know that how often do you actually get 6, 7, or 8% as far as a rate of return? Not very often, right? Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's negative 20. So we're talking about an average 6 to 8%. But if you stick to that 4% and then you increase the dollar value for all of the inflation that will come, right? We haven't had bad inflation here for a while, since the early 80s. Late 70s, but inflation is a silent thief. It's a silent thief in the fact that it usually just creeps up on us. Look at what a postage stamp was 30 years ago, for example, or a vehicle, or going out to eat, anything like that. And you can count on inflation to be about 3, sometimes even up to 4%, depending on what numbers you're looking at. But if you average out all the different price increases on goods and services in America, it's about 3 to 4% over time. So why does this work out? Because if we're earning 6 to 8% and we're withdrawing 4, what that's doing is it's leaving us some value in between that we're banking for the future. That means that we're actually seeing an increase or a trend upwards in our capital value. Let's go back to our $1 million example just to keep it easy. That $1 million, if we took out $40,000, then normally that would cause a drop in value. But let's say we earned $70,000 that year. If we took out 40, what does that leave? Now we have $1,030,000, and that should work, of course, if the market was that way, right? If it always went up 7% a year, the value can go up and down, but as a trend over time, you should be taking out less money than what it's accumulating at. So sometimes the question comes up, so how does that work in a bear market? What do you do about that? Well, the 4% rule, most studies actually show that that is a successful withdrawal rate over a 30-year retirement, even if nobody made any course corrections along the way. In other words, if you took out the 4% and increased it by 3% a year for inflation, that you would have a pretty high likelihood. Most of the numbers I see are in the 80 to 90% chance of success of not running out of money over that 30 years. But sometimes people say, well, I don't like those odds. I don't like that there's still a chance that I could run out. And again, what do we do in a really bad market like we had in 2008, 2009, when the S&P 500 was down 58% from top to bottom? Do you really just keep taking out the same amount of money? Well, no. As a financial planner, I would say, no, that's not a good idea. I think that the best thing to do in a circumstance like that, and what we did do with clients at the time, is we sat down and we took a look at the plan again and figured out, well, where are we now? And although nobody was happy about the financial crisis and the banks going, near belly up, some of them did go belly up, but nobody liked those circumstances. It was really frightening, actually, even for financial advisors. We were all wondering what was going to happen. But bottom line is, what we could do is we could do good planning. We could sit down again and look at the fact that $1 million, depending on how that person was invested, that $1 million may have become $800,000. It may have been worse than that. It might be $600,000 at a 40% loss from top to bottom. So depending on how people were invested, it could have been fairly severe, the drops that people could have had in their portfolios. Well, what if we did this? What if we had a dynamic adjustable withdrawal rate? And then we'd be taking a look at the new capital value, the new $600,000 or $800,000, and applying the 4% to that. Could that work? Well, yeah, right. If we're taking out a percentage and that percentage is adjusting to whatever the new value is, then in theory, we could never run out of money, right? You'd always would be adjusting for that and taking that into account in bear markets. And I can tell you from a practical standpoint, that's what most people did. Most people said, you know what? This is really bad. And temporarily, this is really bad, and we don't need to buy that new vehicle. We don't need to upgrade and buy that vacation home. We don't need to go on that vacation we were planning on, or maybe we'll adjust the type of vacation that we take. And I can tell you, that's what made the economy worse for a while anyway. That actually made the economy worse because people stopped spending. Really, they cut their spending way back, and that caused the economy to sink even further. Why did it burn itself out? There's a variety of different reasons why, but it's kind of like wildfires in the mountains. They happen. They happen almost every year. It's just a matter of how big are they, and they do burn themselves out, as ugly as it can be. And it seems like they're going to go forever and engulf the whole state, but it doesn't end up happening. Eventually, they do burn themselves out, and things get back under control with the help of firefighters, of course. And we'll call our firefighters the government, the Federal Reserve, and Congress and the president. And of course, there's all kinds of discussions we could get there, right? Whether we trust the firefighters that are in charge of stuff. But bottom line is that we've seen some really, really bad crises in the past, and the surefire way, I think, is basically being willing to adjust your plans and not being stuck to just a rigid withdrawal rate. A big part of how you can do that is to decrease as much as possible by the time you retire, to decrease your fixed expenses. In other words, the expenses that are not optional. One of those, a lot of people will work until age 65, for example, because they know that health insurance is extremely expensive before that age. Why is it cheaper after that? Because people qualify for Medicare after that point, typically, and their out-of-pocket expenses go way down. So that's one way, is to wait until Medicare eligibility. Another way could be paying off debt, having debts paid off by the time you retire, or having as many debts as possible that would be paid off by retirement. I'm going to check my chat screen here because it looks like we have had a couple of questions come in. Georgia asked, but does this mean you are drawing at a smaller amount, inflation adjusted every year? Possibly. So again, if we go into a bad economy or a bad market, and unfortunately, in some circumstances, they can last a long time. Downturns can last a long time, and so can the upturns. We've seen the economy in an expansion, even though it's been a slow expansion. We've been in an expansion here for quite some time. And, we look at the 80s and the 90s, for example, the market, with a couple of hiccups in there, but the market went up pretty consistently for the 80s and the 90s. Would have been one of the best times you could have been invested in the market. But unfortunately, that was followed by the 2000s, and the 2000s were what they called the lost decade, when we saw a bear market right at the beginning of the 2000s, and then we saw another one hit in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, two of the worst stock market drops that we've ever seen in stock market history. So yeah, it could mean that you are taking out less if you are adjusting them. Another question came in from Kathy. Should you include your Social Security income in the value of your nest egg for the 4% annual withdrawal calculation? So no, I would not. I would not look at that for these purposes anyway, for the rule. So what we do when we run retirement calculations for people is we want to get that baseline for what people are actually spending, or what they want to be able to spend. In some circumstances, we might have a couple numbers, right? We might have somebody could say, well, I need a certain amount of money just to get by, just for survival. And a few comforts. So that would just be for financial security. And then, but absolute financial freedom, that would be this number, which could be twice, three times as much. Who knows what that would be? That's useful to know because having a range kind of tells you, well, this is how much we could get by on if things got ugly, say if the economy really went south or we had some kind of a crazy expense that we weren't planning on and we had to cut back, we know what we could cut back to. But ideally, really, here's what we'd like to do. And of course, that's what we'd like to plan on taking out. So we do figure those amounts separately. If somebody had Social Security, or say if they had a pension or para, or some other type of income source that they were bringing in, we factor that in separately. And then to kind of think of remember the goose and the golden egg? You might remember that fable. The goose and the golden egg. Basically, the farmer got golden eggs, and this is just amazing that this goose kicks out golden eggs every day. But then what happened is the farmer got greedy and he said, well, I'm going to cut the goose open because I want even more golden eggs. And of course, he opened up the goose is dead, and now there's nothing in there and no more golden eggs tomorrow. So that's what this is really about, is it's about taking care of our goose. Essentially, that's the moral of the story here, is we're trying to take care of our goose by only taking what we can, by living below our means so there's money for tomorrow. So 4%, I've seen studies that have come out recently that have suggested 3%. And some of those articles are kind of talking about the future and saying, based off of interest rates, the direction of interest rates, and stocks being relatively expensive right now, we're probably not going to get as big of returns in the future. So maybe people need to back that down to 3%. Again, those studies tend to come out. This is my bias, of course, but those studies tend to come out and they want to use just a static withdrawal. They want to assume 3% and 3% forever, or 4% and 4% forever, and that you never would decrease the dollar amount. You would always increase the dollar amount. But that's not what I see. With actual clients, that's not what I see, because most people do have some flexibility in their budget. Even though it may not be comfortable, people can cut back on things like going out to eat, travel, and things like that. Again, those are the things we want to do, but if we had to, we could cut back. So great questions. If there's any others, people keep throwing them out there. I love the interaction, so thank you for those questions. So method number 2, we can always come back to that too. It's really, really important. Method number 2 is don't chase returns. And that's important because right now, I can tell you that this time is not different. Right now, what are people chasing? They're chasing tech stocks, and they're chasing cryptocurrency in a lot of cases. People are getting greedy, and they're chasing returns from what has happened in the past. So one thing to keep in mind is that you always have to have some money in conservative investments. You might think, well, why do I have to? Because when the stuff hits the fan, like it did in 2008, what did we do? Well, again, we went back, looked at the plan, and we adjusted our withdrawal rates. But it's always good to have a security bucket. Essentially, if you were to really boil it down and look at this as in 2 buckets, you've got a security bucket and you've got a growth bucket. The security bucket would be anything that we really would like to be more conservative with and not lose, even if that means we get a lesser rate of return. The growth bucket would be the money that we know we could take bigger losses temporarily, but we diversify it, we plan for it, and that's going to be our growth engine over time. That's the plan. So for everybody, I can tell you every single person is going to have a little bit different mix between how much they want to keep in that security bucket versus that growth bucket. Some of it's just the reality of needing to get a certain rate of return and needing to keep more in that growth bucket, simply because it may be the only chance that person has to be able to get the rate of return that they need. For example, some people might say, well, I'm super conservative. I want to put it all in the security bucket, but they just can't economically make it work. It's not going to work out over time to generate the return that they need. So having some money in conservative investments, what does that allow? It allows during those tough times for us to have some place to draw from and not have to take money out of the growth bucket, not to have to sell stocks or real estate or anything else like that that's taken a big hit. Create a cash reserve. I always recommend a cash reserve. It doesn't matter if you are 18 or 80 or 98, everybody should have some cash reserve. That's going to be a very individual decision. I can tell you a good rule of thumb, though, anywhere between 3 to 24 months of living expenses in the cash reserve. For most people, that's going to cover any emergency, any interruption in income, temporary interruption in income. And the cash reserve should truly be that. It should be someplace that's cash in the bank, someplace that's FDIC insured, extremely liquid. That would be a cash reserve. Depending on your circumstances, your own comfort level, and what other income sources you've got, that's going to depend on how big that cash reserve gets. 3 months minimum, though, of your living expenses should be kept in the cash reserve just for emergencies. Avoid emotional investment decisions. That one is the biggest mistake that any investor will make, will be making their investment decisions emotionally. And we actually have proof on that. There's been a number of studies that have come out. Morningstar, probably the most notable organization. They've done studies on this to go back and see what people's actual investment returns were over the last 20, 30 years. And what we've seen is that those numbers come out. Actually, there was a Dalbar study that came out that said that the 30-year return on the S&P 500, just the stock market, the U.S. stock market, about 10%, just north of 10% average as of the end of 2016. Guess how much the average stock mutual fund investor got over that same period of time? 3.98%. So 3.98% was the actual rate of return that the average stock mutual fund investor made. So you might be thinking, well, they were just really bad at picking investments. No, that was not it, actually. What it was is that they were able to attribute nearly all of that to people's behavior and the fact that they were selling when prices were low and they were buying when prices were high. And you might be thinking, that's insane. Why would anybody do that? But the average investor, that's what they do, is that they get scared when the market's low. Again, think financial crisis, October 2008, where we woke up every day wondering which bank went broke overnight, or back to 2001 after 9/11, or 2002 with the corporate accounting scandals with Enron and WorldCom. You can go back and look at a lot of other examples when people are really, really scared. And when people are really, really scared, in not just investment decisions, but in life, a lot of times people, if they make big decisions when they're really, really emotional, oftentimes they make decisions that they would later regret. The same thing can happen with greed. That's the opposite of fear in the investment world, and the people want to buy when things are really expensive. And I can tell you that I hear this on a fairly regular basis from people wondering, should we take on more risk? Should we invest in cryptocurrency? Should we put more money into the big tech stocks, Netflix, Amazon, things like that? Although those are fine companies, don't get me wrong. We all use those companies on a day-to-day basis. But piling on more risk after something's gone up in price dramatically, maybe not the best decision. So avoid emotional investment decisions, but because that obviously will crush your returns over time, will absolutely crush your returns. And I can tell you some really sad stories. I won't get into any specifics, but really sad stories of people who made extremes on either end that have nothing. They lost everything because of reacting to greed or reacting to fear, especially when they get really, really greedy or really, really fearful. That's typically the worst point in time. And again, I know people who are dead broke that had plenty of money to retire, they had plenty of money that they never would have had to work again, but they made a really bad emotional decision. Obviously, that's one of the highest values that I can add in anybody's financial situation, is that I can be the person that says, you know what, don't do that. Not a good idea. And obviously, everybody gets to make their own investment decisions, their own financial decisions at the end. Ultimately, I'm just a guide. I can't make people's decisions for them. But by having somebody else that's not emotionally invested, they can help people make the right decision instead of reacting to fear or greed. And then, of course, continuing to invest. And that works out really well for people who are still working, of course, for people who can put money away into 401ks and IRAs and things like that. Living below your means doesn't just mean in retirement. Living below your means while you're still working is important too, because that difference, and be able to reinvest that money someplace, even if you just put it someplace reasonably smart, to be able to accumulate those retirement funds over time. One question that came in, by the way, George asked, do you consider a CD as part of a cash reserve? I'd say yes. Really, the worst case scenario with a CD, typically from a bank, is that you're going to lose some interest if you had to cash it in early. So banks typically would not nick your principal if you had to get out of a CD early. So yeah, I would certainly consider that to be a cash reserve item because your principal would be protected. Method number 3, take advantage of government subsidy programs, and people have different feelings on this. Of course, we're not going to get political, but Social Security is really, really important for everybody. I know there's lots of people who say, well, it's not going to be there, it's going to go away, but for most of us, that is going to be a factor. We're going to have something that we're going to need to make some decisions off of, and a lot of people leave money on the table when it comes to Social Security because they just don't know how it works. And this isn't a Social Security presentation, so we're not going to get into the weeds on it. But what I can tell you is just the basics, that generally you want to work 35 or more years because that's going to get you the maximum amount of years for credit for Social Security. They do take your highest 35 years. So ideally, if those are your higher earning years, that's great because that's going to increase your overall benefit. There is an averaging that happens with those 35 years. Earn a higher salary in some circumstances. People have the ability to do that later on in their career, and that's great. If they're able to, for example, many teachers find a way to pop into an administrative role, into a principal position that could really boost their government pension benefits. So there could be an opportunity there. Some people will find an opportunity to do contract work where they may have worked for a company for a number of years, but they're actually able to work a couple more years and get a very high salary by doing contract work for the same company or another company. So keep that in mind. You'd be paying payroll taxes, and so that would be making that average go up. Generally, don't claim before your full retirement age. Depending on when you were born, that's going to be anywhere between age 65 and 67 based on current rules. I suspect, I'm 42 years old, I suspect that number is going to go up. I'm probably going to have to wait even longer to draw benefits if it's there. And again, many of you, if your kids or grandkids or others are watching this, they might be saying, fat chance I'm not going to get anything. It's probably a good way to plan, actually. If you're younger, it's probably better to plan as if it's not going to be there. But, chances are it is. And then consider delaying claiming until age 70. Age 70 is the latest that you're going to get any increases, basically. If you wait beyond age 62, every year that you wait, you're getting a 7% increase by waiting. If you wait beyond your full retirement age, it's 8% per year. So it's a pretty significant increase you get for waiting. Some people decide not to do that. They decide to claim early, and they might have their own reasons, and that's totally fine. But generally speaking, you want to wait until your full retirement age before you start drawing benefits, and then consider waiting until 70. I can tell you the break-even point for most people ends up being about age 80 or so, late 70s, 80 years old, as far as when does that crossover point happen, when it made sense to wait from age 62 to full retirement age. So odds are many of us are going to live beyond that point, and it'll end up paying off for us. Suspending payments, we're not going to get into the weeds on that, but sometimes there are opportunities to allow your spouse to start claiming benefits even though you're waiting. You could be increasing or taking a benefit based off of your own record and then switching to your spouse's later. So that one's completely dependent on the situation. Spousal benefits, survivor benefits are also something that can happen if you've had a spouse that's passed away and you're eligible to claim off of their record. Few different tips for retirees to save money. Seek out free entertainment. There's stuff all the time, of course, around in the community. So that's one thing is look for opportunities that could get you cheaper entertainment. Get rid of cable. A lot of people are doing that anyway, right? They're cutting the cord and just going to Netflix or Amazon or something like that. So for a lot of people, that ends up being a fairly significant expense. And I can tell you that the other option there too would be to if you still want to have TV to be able to watch Broncos games or something like that, you can do a house antenna. It's a throwback technology, obviously, but in a lot of circumstances, that's all people really care to watch anyway is the stuff on the networks, and then they supplement that with Netflix or something else. So being creative certainly allows people to get more flexibility with their budget and still feel like they're just as happy as they were before. So that's the ideal. If we're able to find expenses that really don't add a lot of value to our lives. we can cut them. Reducing interest rates, that's an opportunity. Certainly, if people can refinance to lower rates, a little bit difficult right now because rates are going up, not down. But it's possible that you may qualify for some lower rates depending on when you got your mortgage, could result in a lower monthly payment. As for senior discounts, I haven't started doing that yet. I'm not sure. What age do you get to do that? Is that age 50 or 60? I'm not sure, but that could help as well. Silver sneakers is a great deal, right? After you're 65, you get free gym memberships. I think at most gyms are offered. So there's all kinds of stuff out there that you can look for if you're creative. All right. And George says 50, 52, 55, 60, 62, 65. You're right. And those are all the points when people feel like they're old or when they can claim a discount. But I suppose it depends on the company or the organization. I think AARP, from what I've heard, they start sending stuff at age 50, so not that far off from that. So Q&A, we've had some good questions along the way, but I do want to open it up for questions. Obviously, I want to respect all of your time and make sure that you can get on with your day, get on to other work or whatever you've got going on, but I want to open it up for any questions that you've got right now. I can tell you, as we're waiting for any of those to pop into the queue, I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and I can tell you that there's two ways to learn things. One of those is by trial and error, and of course, you can learn anything by trial and error if you don't give up. Thomas Edison, right, thousands of times, and he finally got the light bulb to work. But there's an easier way, I think, and that's by learning from others and learning from others' mistakes and learning from others' other successes. And that's one big benefit that you got from me is I've been in thousands of meetings over the years, and I can tell you lots and lots of examples of people doing things right and succeeding. And I can tell you a lot of examples of people that really made some bad decisions. Obviously, there's always stories about people falling on hard times and things that are outside of their control. But I can tell you that's one thing is we always have the choice to react, and make choices based off of what's happened. And a lot of times people, even in bad circumstances, they could have made some better choices with their money. That's, the scariest thing for me too, is I don't want people to run out of money. So I do want people to pay attention. See, a couple of things that's popped into the queue here. So let's see, does the 4% include the taxes you would have to pay on withdrawals? That's a great question from Jim. So yes, that's going to be the overall amount. Go back to our $1 million example, the $40,000 that needed to come out. Actually, since we're at the Q&A screen, I'm going to switch on my webcam so you can see me again. But yeah, that does include taxes. So really good point, because let's say that we were in that circumstance, we had $1 million, we were taking out $40,000. If it was coming out of an IRA, then that means that money is most likely pre-tax, meaning that when it comes out, you're going to be taxed on that. So you do have to plan on not being able to spend all of that money. So you might have, say, at that level, if that was your only income, you might be paying 10% in federal taxes. So you'd end up with about $36,000 left. And what that would give you is a $3,000 a month after tax amount. So really good point that you made, because you do have to take taxes into account depending on where that money is coming from. If it wasn't a retirement fund, we'd have to look at what it was. If it was a Roth IRA, it could be tax-free. Most people don't have $1 million Roth IRA. That would be really cool, but most people don't have that much in a Roth IRA. That would be a tax-free income source. And then, of course, it could be in something that's not a retirement fund. It could just be in the bank. It could be in investments that aren't in a retirement fund, but there still will be some taxes due on any dividends or capital gains. So we'd have to look at that, and we'd have to look at all your other income sources too to determine what the overall tax liability is, because everything gets taxed a little bit differently. That's why people like me have jobs, right? Because this stuff is complicated. And Social Security gets taxed differently, for example, and company pensions can get taxed differently depending on where you're receiving that money from. And of course, work income gets taxed differently than other income as well. Other things that people commonly have will be rental properties. They may have a rental property for part of their retirement or all of their retirement, and there are some tax advantages with that. Let's see. Larry has a great tip for retirees. Don't forget the $1 fishing license at age 64. So my kids actually have the free fishing licenses. It's a good point. That's free entertainment, right? So my kids have the free fishing licenses. I think you can get those up until age 16, and then there's something after that. Other things that you can do, it could be skiing, for example. There's discounted rates on skiing. There's discounted rates on travel. I can tell you that some of our clients, because they've got the schedule flexibility now after they're retired, they're able to get some really good deals on cruises, on other types of travel if they've got schedule flexibility. We've got some clients that pretty regularly they use the repositioning cruises, where cruise line is trying to get a cruise ship from one place to the other, and they offer really cheap rates, and it's worked out really well with their schedule because they don't need to go at spring break, they don't need to go at Christmas break when everybody else is going. So you can certainly be creative and have a really high quality retirement, have a lot of great experiences, even if you do have to trim back on the budget. Any other questions that you've got? We'll start wrapping this up in the next couple of minutes, but I do have a couple of closing thoughts. Again, the most important thing in your financial life is going to be living below your means and not making crazy decisions based off of emotional stuff. And I really can't emphasize that enough. And the value that an advisor is going to give you and that I give my clients is that, we're going to talk about it together, and we're not going to react emotionally to things. We're going to react based off of facts, based off of the reality of the situation. We don't want to make things worse than they are in our minds, but we also don't want to make them better than they really are and gloss over things. So I can tell you that's one thing that I'm committed to, is telling people the truth, even if it's not always what they want to hear, is that we're going to look at the truth of the situation and then figure out what does that mean and what do we need to do. That's really the next step. I don't see any of the questions. So as we wrap up, one thing, just as a point, back to my point before about being fulfilled in retirement, another Tony Robbins quote: most people fail in life because they major in minor things. And man, isn't that easy to do, to get stressed out over stuff that we have no control over politics and the market and, just world events, all kinds of stuff that is totally outside of our control. And really what's going to lead to fulfillment at the end is growing and learning and contributing back to other people, spending time with the people that you love. Those are the answers that I'm hearing, and we're going to explore in our other series coming up this summer, Living in Retirement and then The Art of Retirement. We're going to be talking about a lot of stories and a lot of great success stories, especially about people who are really, really fulfilled and happy in retirement, how to make that emotional shift, because it's a big one. I can tell you from circumstances, being young, being still working, I haven't been through it, but I've helped a lot of people through it. So I'll be giving you success tips from other people on how they've made that trip and what they've made their retirement look like. Retirement sometimes is also something that people don't really want to do. Sometimes people want to continue working because they love what they're doing. Example, Warren Buffett is 86, 87, 88 years old right now. Still works, still goes into the office. Obviously hasn't needed to for a long time, but he loves what he's doing and he has no intention of retiring. So that could also be part of somebody's retirement. That could also be part of what they're doing, because for them, work is play. For them, it's not work. It doesn't feel like work. So retirement may not actually be the same for everybody, and that we will definitely explore and talk about how people have navigated that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and cut off for today. Again, this is being recorded, and so we will have this available for replay. If any of you has any feedback for me or for stuff that you want to shoot past me for other topics that we might be hitting in the future, I'm always open for that, and we're going to be doing plenty more of these later on this year. Thanks for letting us help you out. Our job is really to simplify the financial world because it's complex. That's the reality, is there's too much information out there, too much complexity, and too many decisions that have to be made. People trying to do that on their own, I highly recommend you visit with somebody that you trust and visit with somebody that can help you see things from a different perspective. If there's anything else that we can help you with, just let us know. My email address is josh@keystonefinancial.org. Our website, www.keystonefinancial.org. I hope you all have a great day and a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.